Welcome back, crew. I'm a little later than I said I would be. Now, I did actually put a lot of research together about a week and a half ago. I'll get to that when I get to the team tiers. But we are now getting closer and closer to the trade deadline, which that should be ending very shortly. And then the All-Star break, which for our particular pool brings us to an interesting part where we get to make our one move. I'll talk quickly about that later. So there's actually a lot to talk about. I'm going to try and go as quickly as I can. I might save some stuff for the next month. I didn't actually take up the December player of the month and all that stuff. So lots to go. Let's start with our team tiers. This time I'm going to switch it up just a little bit. Instead of going from top to bottom, let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Skilos, I wish. I mean, obviously all these teams wish they were ballers. I was going to be a little bit harsher, and next time I think I will, just because we are getting a clear division of our bottom tier teams. If this was football, I'd call this the toilet bowl, but this is kind of just the teams that not only are they not playing that great, but they're also kind of showing that they're, any given night they might put up a fight, but they're not really interested in the long term. They're already kind of gearing up. Now, the sad part is, we'll talk more about this as the season goes on. This is not supposed to be a phenomenal draft, so all the trades for picks that were happening, not so sure. But for me, the bottom tier here, I mean, the Pistons deserve their own category, but remember, they did finally break that streak. Now, granted, a little bit of an asterisk when they beat the Raptors. It shouldn't have been, but it was during that trade that I'll mention in a little bit that we all know with OG Anunoby. So they didn't get the new guys in, but the guys were gone, so you can blame that, I guess. But Pistons won. They actually won again recently, this time against a playoff team, so bonus points if you know what I'm talking about there. They're still at the bottom of the tier here. Wizards, same, but different. They haven't had the massive, epic losing streak, but they're not doing great. I'd throw the Hornets. I'm going to put the Spurs and I'm going to put the Trailblazers all in this bottom pool. Now, the Spurs are a little bit more interesting sometimes because Wemby has been showing signs of life, which is nice for people. They actually are a little bit more respectable. They actually weren't that far ahead of a team like the Pistons in terms of total wins. They're now up to 10 at the time of recording. This is Tuesday the 30th. I'll try and get it out by tonight. Let's see if I can actually do that. But realistically, they have now at least passed both Detroit and Washington for overall team wins and tied with Charlotte. The reason I throw the Trailblazers in, I mean, 14 wins is obviously not great. It's under 30% here. But also I think it's just the way that they're losing. Scoot's actually getting a little bit more, and actually, if you've got Scoot's stock, you know he's starting to play a little bit better, but for a guard, that's probably expected. But these teams aren't really showing a whole lot of life. If there was a cool person that we knew was going number one right now, it looks like it might be the French kid who's playing out of Australia, but we don't know for sure. That's all kind of hearsay. There's not the guaranteed number one. So they're not really tanking for any particular reason, probably just because they're not that great. I am fully aware that know thyself is a Socrates, or as one of my students once said, Socrates, quote, I'm going Oracle from the Matrix because that's what I think of, little sign, nice and pretty. In this particular case, this is going to relate to the next section I have. At least these teams know who they are. I'd say Grizzlies, Raptors, and Nets making some deals. The Raptors obviously losing OG Anunoby, getting IQ, and the Canadian coming back is fine. They seem keen on getting a lot of picks. Again, last year, I would have been cool with that, and maybe there's some people we're not seeing. This is supposed to be a really international draft next year. Coming out of college, there's not as many big people. I've seen some pre-draft boards that always change when March hits and people become obsessed, but as of now, there could only be maybe 3 or 4 in the top 10 that are actually college players. There seems to be a big international pool. Again, I would fully expect that to change by the time we get down to it. So I don't know who they're seeing. Maybe the Raptors have someone in mind. Grizzlies, it's more, I mean, Ja Morant's now out. They actually had a little bit of a bubble where they were playing a little bit better. And the Nets are funky. After they got fined, for those I'm sure people are aware, they were benching too many people at one time, clearly just saying, we do not care about winning. But they got fined by the league. So now they've been trying a little bit. Technically, again, we can go as time of recording. They have snuck in to the last, like the 10th plan spot where they're tied with Atlanta. And so whether they make the playoffs or not, I'd still keep them in this category. They know who they are. They don't expect, I think, to make a massive run. I think they're fine with their situation. They might not be done with their trades quite yet. And I think that they're, at least, you know, there is value in the fact Sometimes as an educator, we're supposed to have kids see who they really are. My comment is always, well, what if they're an ass? Are they supposed to reflect that? The truth is, yeah, as long as you know what you are, then I think at least you know what's next. And I think those three teams puts them in a perfect spot. Couldn't say it any better. I said the last group was going to relate to this group. So these groups, more talented, but Zoolander, who am I? I don't know if they're yelling at puddles, and I don't know if Ben Stiller yells back, but these teams are in different phases of this, but the Lakers, the Warriors, the Rockets, the Suns, and the Hawks, so very Western Conference in this particular one. I didn't mean for that. And you can see already some of those teams are in the playoff hunt, some are just out. Talking about the Western teams just quickly, and by that I'm going to avoid the Suns just for 1 second. Again, at time of recording, as of right now, Houston's on the outside looking in, as is Golden State, whereas the Lakers are at the 9 spot, well, tied for 9 with Utah. But I think they really have to decide what they're going to be. I mean, I've actually heard all three of these teams. I have not heard the Lakers in a fire sale. There were some extreme opinions out there that thought LeBron would get traded. I think that's just people who are bored and have nothing to do. I don't think there's any stock in that. But I have heard buying and selling from both or all three of these teams because they don't really know if they're making that push. Now, Houston's still playing with house money. The fact that they're just, a little bit, they're, I think, a game out of 500 or a game and a half, however you want to calculate it. They're 22 and 24, so 2 games, but you know what I mean, percentage-wise. That would actually be a success for them. That was not expected, so that's fine. Whereas Lakers and Golden State, if they miss the playoffs, which right now Golden State is meant to, and Lakers are just squeaking in, that would be a huge disappointment. We've talked a lot about both of those teams, and I think the biggest thing, LeBron making the comment after the epic game that they had together, which I am going to get to in a little more depth in my 2 cents, but he kind of made that comment to Ham that they want the starting lineup that they finished with last year to get more playing time. It screwed me over because I took Austin Reeves to be a 6th man. Now he no longer qualifies as a 6th man. We'll get to that when we talk about awards quickly. But these teams kind of have to decide what they want out of this year and then fully commit. If you end up being that wishy-washy, you don't really buy, you don't really sell, and you don't really make a playoff run, Houston, that's acceptable because they're young. Lakers and Golden State, how many more years are they going to have? And they've actually been, knock on wood, blessed with good health, which was not necessarily the case. You might be surprised I put Phoenix in here, whereas of right now they're a 6 seed and actually would skip the play-in. They would just straight up make the playoffs. But they could be a team that I could see going on an epic loss. I think they're going to make the playoffs, obviously, but could get into that 7 through 10 tier. Or they could be a team that actually competes for the West and are good enough. And I think the who am I for them is they really have to figure out how to play together. I did watch a few of their games in the past month. I was home for a little bit of this and I caught some games. They'll have a quarter where they look like they're the best team in the West, if not the league, and they look like they can play with anybody. And then they completely flip the switch and it looks like they're just on completely different pages. So again, I reserve the right to be wrong on this one. They could go on this epic swing. I don't think they actually have a good understanding of what they want and who they are. I put in the Hawks on this one as the only one in the East, just because, again, they're trading people away, so maybe they do know. They're involved in some deals, and Murray's up on the trading block, apparently. But they're not really pulling the trigger on the big deals, and I'm not really sure if they have decided, is Trae Young their future? Should they start making bigger plays? Who are their essential pieces? And once they figure that out, I think they at least know buy, sell, and where they go. So the span of this particular tier is very different. But like I said, these tiers aren't always made just on rankings. They're kind of in thematic order. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Great line from Airplane. But I put these teams in here because they actually, when they play and they're making runs, they're teams you have to take seriously. And I think they take themselves super seriously. On any given night, they've looked phenomenal, and then they've had massive loopholes. The Bulls is the biggest shock to me. They've kind of cooled off a bit, but they definitely went on a run for the past month. They've had more of a solid, odd that they go on a run. They're not even 500 and they're in the 9th spot, but they were looking like they might be one of the selling teams. And now it looks like they still might make some moves, but I think they've made it kind of more clear on they do want to be a team in the East, and they're not interested in the fire sale. So I included them on this one, even though they might stand out as different from the other two, because the Magic and the Jazz, actually the Jazz and the Bulls, you could argue almost very similarly. The Jazz I kind of had earmarked in my head as one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the West, and now they hold a playoff spot again. I don't know if they hold it, but if you watch them play, I mean, there's certainly, Danny Ainge is putting together groups that believe in themselves, and I think that they feel that they should be a playoff team and kind of a no doubter. And I threw the Magic in. They've kind of got ups and downs. I mean, they were as high as fifth in the East at one point in time. I thought most people just assumed they couldn't hang on. Now they are tied with Miami for the 7th spot, putting them in just the play-in rounds. But again, with their youth and their youth developing maybe a little faster than even some of us expected, I think they think they're legit, and sometimes thinking you are is half the battle. Now we're obviously getting to playoff teams, and so in this particular case, the order being backwards is going to shift things a little bit because sometimes it's process of elimination. So you might not understand this one. When I'm calling this the mandate or the significant other, we all have partners or have had partners in the past. There's always that interesting, I have a friend and we want to come over. We want to do a double date situation. You've never met the guy, but you guys are going to get along, right? Like he likes sports. And I always have that cringe. I'm like, does he actually like sports? Or are we about to get in a conversation about cycling? Because that's a big thing over here in Europe. And I'm like, I get it. I'm not arguing about it. It's hard. And people, Tour de France, that's great. But don't tell me that I'm going to get along with the guy just because you get what I mean. Sometimes you do end up being quite close with these people and they can be good friends. Sometimes it's just, your partner likes their partner. And so you just know you're stuck with each other. I put those in this case because they could be good. I'm just not buying it. I think some people are going to get mad about the teams I put in here. I put the Cavs, the Pelicans, and the Kings. I'll give you a second to scream at the TV. There we go. Cleveland, I understand they're a 5 seed, and they can play great as well. It's just, I think just matchup-wise, when I'm doing the tiers now, I'm forming in my head not just who might finish in the rankings, because I think as we know, that's only half the battle. I'm thinking of playoff series and who they might bump into. And right now, I don't think anyone would be scared to get Cleveland in the first round. I think that there's talent, but they don't really gel. I think that they don't have necessarily the depth. I think they can be taken advantage of with some size issues. I just don't see them beating any of the good teams in the East. And I could be totally wrong. It's just, I'm not buying it. On the other side, again, Sacramento, also a 5 seed. 60% winning percentage here. You might think I'm an idiot for doing this. 27-18. They're looking great at times, but I'm in the same boat. I was more scared of them last year than I am this year, to be completely honest with you. And I know Shay's probably cursing because he's probably quite high and maybe took him early. I could be wrong. It just doesn't feel like they've evolved. And I feel like if I could bet without knowing an opponent, if I could bet for a first round knockout, I got the Kings. And I don't think I don't take them that seriously. Could be mine. I could be wrong. Again, mandate. Might end up being best friends with this guy. I just don't see it. And then the Pelicans, I've been on this for a bit. I don't need to elaborate too much. I mean, obviously they had a great run in the midseason tournament, but inconsistencies. I mean, the fact that even now, still midseason, and Zion's panting coming up. I don't know if you guys have watched, but he looks like he's going to die sometimes out there. And I know that they've developed an offense that doesn't always depend on him, but they're at their best when he's flying. In a playoff series, same. I don't see them getting to the second round. And so that's essentially what I thought this tier would show. Okay, the next 3 teams they're just too much fun. You want to quit them and you want to try and poke holes. And I actually think that this is slightly outdated. These 3 teams could go out in the first round. But I think we're getting to that point where these 3 teams, they are not favorites to win. I mean, first round matchup, maybe, sure, because if you do the math, there's 8 that will get through, so 1 or 2 of these might make it. But if a few things happen, they could actually make a run. I put the Mavericks in here. I don't think they're making a run in the West, but do you want to play Luka? Do you not have a good time just when he goes off? And Kyrie, we can put politics aside. I mean, I don't know what earth he plays on, but when he's such control of his body and of the game when he's in there. I put the Pacers here, and obviously with Halliburton and the run they went on, I have a vested interest in this. I think the trade that they made will be really interesting to see how Siakam kind of evolves into part of that offense, but they could be a dangerous team, and they're super fun to watch. I threw the Knicks in here too, and while I do think that some trades you can say both teams won, I'm a big component in who got the best player. And while the Knicks and the Raptors, that seemed like a fairly even trade in some way, shapes, or form, I think the Knicks dominated that trade because I don't think the draft picks will amount to a whole lot. And OG Anunoby, the second you hear he's a Knick, you're like, yep, He actually just has always been a Knick, just wearing a different jersey. Now he's a little hurt right now, but I think that's just more of a knock-up. What he did to their defense, what he did to their confidence, it was a perfect fit, and I think they're actually a dangerous team. I think the top tier in the East should win out, but each of them have injury concerns or a what-if factor. And I don't think the Knicks are going to... I think if they got to the second round, that'd be a big deal. I think you talk to a lot of Knicks fans now, they might expect to go to the Eastern Final. I think that's a reach for me personally. But if a few things happen, like if I'm on FanDuel and I'm back home and I can make this bet and there's like a future where they're like 20-1 to win the East, I don't know. I've wasted $10 on something worse than that. Again, I don't think that they're great, but they're a lot of fun. All right, here I go again. Now, if you're not thinking of Will Ferrell and his not so street legal ride that he's tuning up in old school, then maybe we're not friends. But in this particular case, these are two teams that I'm already reserving the right that I probably was wrong and I could be wrong, but I still think I'm kind of right. But here we are again. I got the Heat and I got the Clippers. Now, the Clippers, you could argue, could win the West just outright, 100%. They're probably the second or third best team in the West right now. You know how I feel about that team, though. I trust Leonard to an extent. George 50-50. And Harden, if he plays like this, then he's done this before, though. This is one of the best versions of him. I just don't know. He plays hard and he plays every day, which is something we will touch upon later. But it just seems like when the going gets tough, I don't know. And I'm not buying all the playoff hype. I know that gets over-reported. I still don't trust this completely. But again, who knows? If they're playing like this, nobody wants to touch them. The Heat are in the same. They're on a bit of a downslope right now. I think the moves that they were kind of making and obviously having a rookie come out and he's playing phenomenal, but they've got some dead weight and they've got some issues, but there's still that Heat culture thing. I have a hard time betting for or against them. I don't necessarily like the Heat very much, but they do just have that air of the team that just might do it again. And in a 7-game series, if it turns into a bar fight, they seem to be decent at that, and the ground and pound is their kind of advantage. So I thought two different reasons, but I thought they belonged in the same tier together. Okay, so if you're doing your math, I got 6 teams left. Now, what I've decided is for the rest of the year, I'm going to have a Mount Rushmore. So that's going to force me to go 2-2. That was tough. And if I didn't say I was going to do that beforehand, and I could have cheated because I didn't tell anyone I was doing it, but I knew in my head I was doing it. It means that I have 2 that didn't quite make it. And this one's an interesting one. When I did my research about a week and a half ago and I was going to record the video, I was actually almost sat down to do it and then things happened. I had a different team in the East and I've switched them. Now in the West, it was easy for me and it actually was verified by, I think it was last night's game. The Thunder I put here, they're too close. They could make that run. I just don't have them as the top 2 right now. I think with the Thunder, it's a little bit of, again, just it's matchup based. And maybe it's the size that kind of scares me. Now Chet's playing great, but I don't think their depth of size is that good. It's really, really hard for me not to make Giddey can't throw around NBA players like they're 16-year-old girls. I don't think we can make fun of that quite yet because apparently the charges, there's no charge you can read. You know what's going on. Long story short, SGA has now been climbing up in MVP ballots and he's really standing on his own. So it's not like I'm saying that they're a flawed team. I'm putting them 3rd in the West and it's close, but I just don't see it there. In this particular, I can't put them ahead of the other 2 is what I'm trying to say. It's hard when you're talking about what a team's not versus what they are. They're a great team and they are super fun to watch. I think they're phenomenal. It's just, you get it. In the East, I switched teams. And so I'm putting the 76ers in here now and they weren't last week. This is going to have something to do with what I'm going to talk about later in both segments coming up because I think it's interesting in terms of benching and managing some egos potentially and some maintenance and giving people rest. But ultimately, right now, with the moves that were made from the other team in the East that I'm going to talk about, I kind of just feel like they, in the similar vein, when they were playing well, they do look like they could be the best in the East, and that's why originally I had them on Mount Rushmore. I'm seeing matchup-wise, I just think if the 2 and the 3 play each other, I think the Sixers are the one that take the early exit, and so right now I have them off the mountain. JR Mount Rushmore, you probably could have picked the top two in each. I got the Celtics and the Nuggets as the ones I knew for sure. Although I will say if Porzingis is out for any extended period of time, I've said it before and I said it again, when healthy, the Celtics are the best in the East. If Porzingis is out, they can be beaten by at least 2 or 3 other teams in the East, and I think they know it, and we'll be interested to see how that rolls. I also don't think they're an exceptionally well-coached team. Second row Joe is doing better, but I don't think it's I think there's still an issue there with some of the rotations. Nuggets, I don't care what place they finish in. When they want to play, they play. For many of you know, I'm a big, I like Tarantino. You'll also notice in Tarantino movies, if a character eats off of someone else's plate during the movie, he usually kills them in that scene or later on in the movie. It's a big power play. I thought about that when Jokic and the Nuggets were in Golden State and he hits the huge three. It was kind of, a little junky, but hits the buzzer beater to win it. I'm like, man, that's grabbing food off a plate. That's a bold move. And I think you put them in the playoffs, unless there's injuries, they're still my number one. You can figure out the other ones here. So the Timberwolves I put in, and that was close with the Thunder. I do think that they've just got the physical presence. I think Gobert should be Defensive Player of the Year if the league ended right now. They're a tough team. They play hard. They play together. And I think ultimately they outlast. I even think the Nuggets, this is one team that they do not necessarily want to see in the Timberwolves, because that could be a tough matchup for them. And obviously I flipped the East teams. I put the Bucks in, and especially after the coaching change, which I thought was really interesting. And Giannis is saying all the right things because he tends to, but this idea that he didn't get the coaches fired. If he did, that's 2 coaches in a matter of, under a calendar year. But I don't think he did. I believe him at face value, but there's no way he's not consulted. The NBA is run totally different than ever in the league. We know this. The players have more input. There's goods and bads with that. I think that it puts GMs in a tough spot. I would be shocked if he wasn't the one advocating for it. Okay, but he was definitely talked to, and not in the, hey, I just want to let you know this is what we're doing. It's done. I wanted you to hear it from me. I think that conversation is more like, and again, I have no sources. This is all hearsay, but it'd be more of a, hey, this is what we're thinking. What's your input? How do you feel things are going? And I think he was involved in the process, whether he instigated it or not, because you want to make sure your star's happy. Because remember, the guy's freaking brother on the team for a reason. They're trying to make him happy. Milwaukee wants him to stay forever and for always, or until they don't want him anymore. So we'll see how the Rivers coaching changes go. I just hope, they're a playoff team. I hope they don't ever go up 3-1, because the media will have a field day with Doc in a 3-1 playoff series. But they're playing better than I thought in terms of defensive. I think they had a rough start defensively, and Lillard obviously isn't going to put any ball pressure. But what it's done is actually brought Giannis out a bit more and had his defense step up. So it's been an interesting byproduct. They're playing a lot better than I thought, and so I put him on the mount. There's not as much to talk about this month in terms of point changes, although I have a lot to talk about with awards. Last time we had the in-season tournament and all the updates that were therein. In this particular case, we just had the player of the month for December. So if you take a look, that's SGA and Giannis. So thanks, good for me. That was a nice month. We'll see what January holds, and we do still have a few more to go with there. The one interesting part, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about this in my 2 cents bit, but if you've been paying attention, and if you notice in the offseason, you need to play a minimum of 65 games to qualify for any of the major league awards. So you can only miss 17 games. And there's a few players who are getting quite close, and there's actually some that are already ineligible, like the Kyrie Irvings or obviously Ja Morant. But what I think is going to be interesting here is I'm pretty sure, even if you're disqualified from the all NBA teams, an MVP, Rookie of the Year, defensive, whatever, if you're disqualified, I think you can still be considered the leader of a category. We can talk about that one, but I believe that's what the NBA is saying. So as of right now, Embiid is our leading scorer with 36, with Luka just behind with 34.7, with both of them going off for 70 plus, and that being in the cards. It'll be interesting to see how that finishes. And Embiid, obviously, as of right now, I believe he can only miss 5 more games. I think he's already missed 12. In the same ballpark is actually our assist leader, Halliburton, who's got 12.6. I have a vested interest in playing with that because Trey, who I actually also do have, is at 10.8, and that would be a much tighter fight. But I believe he still would qualify, and he's also missed 12. He was out for a while. I don't know if people noticed. He has come back since, just if he's going to need more time off. it might cost him an All-NBA because he is considered in that right now. For our rebounds, we got Sabonis is currently at 13, but Gobert is at 12.5, and Davis and Joker are both at 12.1. So the rebounding title might come to the last few days. Steals right now, SGA's got a lock. They got he's averaging 2.25 versus just under 2.19 something is Mitchell. So we'll see how that kind of pans out. And then for blocks, Wemby's coming back, man. He's the only one over 3. He's at 3.12, and then Lopez and a bunch of others are 2.7 and they're around. So those are currently our stat leaders. Those ones are a little easier to track. Now, like I said, when it comes to awards, you can tell because Embiid was the odds-on favorite. He was the only guy in minus numbers according to FanDuel, which again is just a site. It's one opinion. The votes haven't gone through yet, so it's a guess. But he got knocked down to 3rd or 4th in the order. So Joker currently right now is considered their best bet for MVP with SGA at 2nd. Rookie of the Year, we flipped back again. Wemby's had a good month. He's now back to the leader with Chet just being under him. And obviously Miami's gentleman is going off, and he's now number 3. Defensive Player of the Year, this is probably the tightest or the loosest odds. Gobert is actually well into the minuses here. He's considered the odds-on favorite by a fair bit, with OG Anunoby actually 2nd. Chet Holmgren actually right now is 3rd in money with Davis and Bam. Bam being another one that total time taken off might come into play. Our most improved, no one's got anybody on the top. So this could be one if people are interested in looking at and they're a midseason move. We got Maxey, Şengün, and Barnes as the top 3 most likely right now, but no one's necessarily the clear favorite. The clutch, we've got Lillard, SGA, Curry, and LeBron in that order. I don't know how they decide that still to this day. 6th man, we got screwed. I had Austin Reeves for a reason, and he was the odds-on favorite, and now he's starting, so he's not considered a 6th man. IQ gets traded to the Raptors. He was the next in terms of statistical favorite. He's now a starter, is not a 6th man. So out of nowhere, we got Tim Hardaway Jr. as the leader, but it's very much open. Monk, Clarkson, a few other names there. Bogdanovic, I think, is also in there as potentials right now, but there's no clear odds-on favorite. So we'll see how that kind of develops and how that moves along. Do remember, when you're making your ad drop or you're thinking of your ad drop, you do have to drop someone. They are now eligible for anyone else to take, and I will decide the order. We'll talk a little bit that at the exit, but I'll be honest with you, spoiler alert, I'm just gonna look up what we did last year. I'm not 100% sure yet. But taking a look at your team, some of the steals here, OG Anunoby now getting that trade and looking quite tight. So Chainer's actually got both candidates right now that are supposed to be top 2 in Defensive Player of the Year. So that's pretty sweet. Although he's also got the Embiid issue that we mentioned before. Take a look at where your kids are at. I mean, we got right here, rebounding leader. I see Rennie's happy with that right now. Shea's not having a lot of people, but essentially he's probably hoping for a few of them to squeak in to the all tournament, the all NBA or defensive. I mentioned Bam being an issue here. Jamal Murray could be an interesting candidate for some of those teams. And obviously you got your big 3 who's looking pretty decent. For me, I think my top 4 is fine. After that, let's not talk about them. Anyway, let's kind of try and wrap this part up. So let's go to my 2 cents. So hopefully I don't just ramble for hours and hours. All right, for my 2 cents, I want to jump in because every time in my head I plan this out and it's like 2 to 3 minutes and then it ends up being anywhere from 5 to 8. So let's get right down to it. I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the last little bit. I talked about the Pistons losing streak that ended. We had the Celtics. I mean, it was just starting to get momentum. They were 20-0 at home until the Nuggets went in and beat them. Once again, coming back to the Nuggets and their guts. So that kind of left. I think you even had like Houston. It's a really interesting one. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but they can't win on the road like at all. They're all home favorites, but that's not what I want to talk about. In the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of 70 bombs with Embiid and then Luka following it up. Now, the teams they played were not phenomenal, but that's not new. All right, that's I'm not going to pick on that. I do think it's easier to score in the league right now, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. That's always been basketball too. When a guy's got a hot hand, they get out of the way. I did love it if you saw that sometimes, especially in Embiid's case, when he was trying to get to 70, the fans were booing when anyone else took a shot. I think that's hilarious. But I'm more interested now in the follow-through and what's happened since. Because one of the biggest things, and this is going to apply, I mean, we mentioned it, I mentioned it in the previous 2 sections that it's something I was going to bump into, this idea that we have the playing, the minimum playing amount of 65 games to qualify for awards. And the NBA really doing everything they can to try and spur on competition. And I get it. The in-season tournament happened, and obviously that helps. But now's that time. You really want to lock people in December and January because now, again, time of recording, this Sunday will be the first Sunday since August that we don't have football on. And some people are into hockey. Some people might be waiting for pitchers and catchers, but this is obviously when the NBA wants to heat up and get all that momentum so they can carry it through and have that all the attention going into their playoff runs. And then you have Embiid sitting out again when he goes to Denver. He hasn't played in Denver since 2019, unless my records are wrong. Last couple years, this MVP online spat, and again, I said this in the football video, there is no intelligence test to post anything online, trust me. So you can't really take all the opinions at face value, but people who turn this into people that don't tend to get votes and people who do tend to get votes, I get what they're trying to do, but it lacked kind of the essence of what we're looking at here. If you're looking at that, I mean, think about it. They changed the all NBA voting process so that you don't have to do just one center anymore. You can be positionless. Essentially, so Embiid and Joker can be on this first team, because in the last 3 years, or 2 years for sure, they both should have been on the first team, but they were both centers, so they had to go 1-1. NBA, in terms of how you get into the Hall of Fame, this stuff actually matters. It gets brought up, so they like to take it really seriously. And yet, Embiid might not qualify. In fact, it's looking like he's not. I believe he can only miss 5 more games at this point. And if he gets hurt, like legit hurt, he's done. And he is a guy that does need some nights off. I totally get that. I mean, part of the problem in the past is he runs himself ragged in the playoffs. But remember, also part of the playoffs is that you don't really take those games off, so you want to ramp your body up for that. I get it, and they have smart people looking into it, but it's like in teaching. If the kid's always sick the day of a test, you know what it is. You can't tell me that you just couldn't have played one of the Denver games since 2019. I know we have dumb brains. I think 2019, that's like nothing. That's 5 years ago. That was before we even knew what face masks were for. So if you want to get this competitive balance, I mean, Embiid's just going to play himself out of it. And that's a shame, because he's had a phenomenal season. He's our leading point scorer. But again, I agree that the NBA needed to make these restrictions because it just makes it easier. It's cut and dry. If you don't play this many games, you can't win the awards. You would have thought that might have spurred him on for someone who made such a big deal about being left out in previous years. But now maybe he's got his MVP, and maybe he really is just gearing up for the playoffs. But I mean, basketball is different than every other sport. In baseball, you get the mano-a-mano, the one-on-one of pitcher versus catcher. But if I'm a hitter and I never pitch, we never flip the script, right? In football and any other sport, there's none of this one-on-one. In basketball, it's ingrained in the sport. Like, there actually is one-on-one competitions, 3-on-3 competition. The Olympics has like street ball stuff, right? So this is part of it. This is what fans want to see. They want to see two people that were supposed to be the two best centers in the league in the past couple of years going after each other in totally different ways. And then we can get into arguments about one that's a little bit more kind of the old school model of a center. One's more the European, the facilitator. How do they play off of each other? And we didn't get it. And it's not like we're going to get in the playoffs unless they both make the finals. So huge missed opportunity. And it's kind of a bummer, because I think in this year's MVP race, he went from the leading candidate to now he's down to third or fourth, and that's the only reason why. Again, I know the league's always going to be battling and fighting different fights. It just, for me, if you want to be considered the top dog, you got to want to prove it. And what better way than to going into Denver, like Jokic did when he went into Boston, like he did when he went into Golden State, and he showed what he can do on the road. You want to be talked about in that conversation, you got to put in the groundwork. You think I would know better by now than to say I'll definitely have a video out, because who knows? I mean, even with time restrictions and blah, 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 you never really know when I'm going to come out with these. But my plan is to wait until the January Player of the Month goes, and then we will get close to the All-Star break. It'll either be just before or just after the All-Star break. During the All-Star break, do remember, we're going to make our moves. I'll be in touch about that one. You get to drop one, add one, the order of which I will also clarify, so all should be well. Hopefully you enjoyed. I have a whole lot more to say because it was a lot of time, but I'm saving a little bit for next month. We're starting to gear up. Obviously, with the All-Star break is near, then we know now's the stretch where people start to kind of fall in, fall out, so hopefully there's tons more to talk about. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed, and again, best of luck, crew.